Hi, and welcome to an introduction to FICO's SPSS score. My name is David Smith. I am an originations consultant with FICO. I have about 15 years worth of experience in the origination space and about 10 plus with dealing with the small business scoring service models and small business lending. It's my job today to talk to you about the SPSS score, its components, how we build it, how it works, how the market uses it, and the technology that delivers it. So the agenda for the next 45 minutes is going to cover an introduction and an overview to SPSS, the liquid credit service, which is the technology that delivers the models to your loan origination system. We're going to talk in general how models are created and in specific how we do it within SPSS world. Then we're going to talk about the SPSS component overview. In other words, what data creates the score. And we're going to talk about the benefits of using SPSS scores, how the market's using it, how banks are benefiting and gaining from both a risk mitigation factor as well as a regulatory factor. I'm going to talk about the predictive power of SPSS 7.0, in other words, what kind of lift, quote unquote, you will get by using the scores. And then we'll talk about some SPSS success stories. So let's go ahead and begin. The goals of the small business lender are to process small business applications as quickly and accurately as they can. And in today's world, the market changed about 7 or 8 years ago post-recession. A lot of organizations popped up, and they're commonly referred to as fintechs. They're your OnDecks, your direct capitals of the world, and they created their models, or they use SPSS to adjudicate loans quickly within minutes and can process these applications. So banks are it put banks on their heels a little bit, but the community banks and the larger banks are responding well by processing more small business applications quickly, and they're using analytics to do it. The larger banks have their own data, they create their own models, they have their own analytic teams. Smaller, medium, and community banks don't have those teams, and so those banks have to look, and credit unions and financial institutions, those institutions have to look to somebody who produces these models. Another goal is you're trying to broaden the type of small businesses you can accept, right? You don't want to say no unless it's a risk factor, right? So when can we say yes? When can we, what kind of analysis can we do as a bank, as an institution, to say yes to more small businesses? And in that saying yes, we want to safely increase the dollars and the number of loans that we offer. And of course, what we can't do is overburden our underwriting team. There are only so many hours in a day. There are only so many decisions that you want them to make in a day, and the underwriters need assistance. And this is in the small business space. I don't think we're ever going to get rid of the underwriter, but what we can do is provide them tools to assist them in making their decision. I like to use the term expedite decision process as opposed to automate the decision process, because most small business lenders still want hands-on, just for a little bit, but they still want somebody looking at these applications if at all possible. And then from a profitability standpoint, you can help grow your solution, help grow your portfolio by using solutions with SPSS. So all of the goals that are in mind for a financial institution are assisted by analytics like the SPSS score. Some effects on small business lenders. The financial crisis put us in a new position, right? Everybody tightened their credit risk requirements. And even today, there's still that effect. It's not as tight as it was back in 2009, 2010, probably through 2013, but it's still tight. You're still a little more old school than new school, but we're starting to blend those two schools together. Of course, you've got higher capital requirements. You've got different levels of stress testing, more analytics to prove out what you're doing, and greater scrutiny of credit models. You've got to prove your models. And then again, all of this is assisted by SBSS, and I'll detail why specifically later. And then banks and financial institutions need better systems and controls. More automation / expedition is essential. The market space is creating a tighter time frame. I can get a decision, in minutes or hours on the web, and the local community bank, the credit union, sometimes can't compete with that. So what do you do? The need to update assumptions, the need to look at new factors, new objectives, new data on a regular basis will assist the financial institution in making those decisions. So sometimes, when you think about underwriters' biases, do those biases change over time? Has your underwriter bias changed since the recession, or has it been reinforced? And I say bias as a neutral term. It just means you favor one thing over the other. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means you lean into something, some piece of data, some element. It could be debt service coverage. It could be quick ratio. It could be EBIT to interest that you really like. Pardon me. But, is that still valid? And with analytics like the SBSS score that are rewritten on a regular basis, you get to back those biases up, back those assumptions up on a regular basis. And then, of course, there's always, under all of this, is the underlying regulatory need. I need to track, verify, and audit all of my credit decisions. I need to make sure that I'm doing this fairly according to regulatory purpose, according to regulatory boundaries. And again, the SBSS score can assist with this. When you factor in, especially in the small business space, there's a lot of human adjudication that takes place. You want to back that up with analytics, back that up with a strategy that is proven and consistent. You're never going to get a regulator out of your office forever, but with consistent objective decisions, you're going to make that event as painless as possible. So from a market standpoint, there is opportunity for small lenders to win based on customer satisfaction. The studies are showing that the top reasons for dissatisfaction with small businesses or small banks and financial institutions is a difficult application process, waiting a long time for a decision, and everybody's facing a lack of transparency. I do think that the market expects more transparency than we're willing to give, but that's sort of the world we live in today. Everybody sees how the sausage is made and everything else, and we expect that the same in a credit decision space. And that just sometimes can't be overcome. But the waiting a long time for credit decisioning, the difficult application process, that can all be mitigated, and we can talk about that, how that's overcome a little later. But basically, utilizing analytics like SBSS, you can ask for less information and get more prediction. And again, we'll cover that in a little bit. So I say all that to say this. The SBSS score is stable, mature, and proven. Believe it or not, the SBSS score has been around for 21 years. And FICO has a few customers that date back into the 90s, and we fully respect them. But there are organizations that have been doing this for 2 decades now. FICO invented small business scoring, and I think we're the best at it. The latest version is 7.0, so that'll tell you that about every 3 to 5 years we're refreshing the score. As major factors come into play from a macro and microeconomic process come into play, we'll figure out if we need to change the model and update the model with new data. The latest version is built on hundreds of thousands of accounts, and the building of a model and the risk mitigation, your credit risk officers and your analytics team are going to butt heads sometimes because the risk team doesn't want to produce a quote-unquote bad account, right? I don't want accounts going delinquent. I certainly don't want them charging off. But the best performing models are built with a large number of bad accounts. And this is where the SPSS comes in to help you. You can have a large portfolio, but if you're a very conservative organization and you don't have very many delinquent accounts or charge-offs, you're still not going to be able to build the best model. We have in these hundreds of thousands of accounts, tens of thousands of bad accounts. You know, let the contributors to the SPSS development pool have the bad accounts, and you get to enjoy the risk mitigation that prevents them, right? That's sort of the joy of being a community bank, a smaller institution, and utilizing the SPSS score because it is built on a large number of delinquent accounts. So it's a lot of fuel to that fire. That's why we think 7 is very predictive. The models are also delivered via Liquid Credit Service. We have 20-plus loan origination partners and resellers out in the world. Last year we sold over 1.25 million scores. So our customers are utilizing it on a grand scale. And, you know, we've got over 150 customers who interface with over 75-plus SPSS models. And when a new prospect calls up, we can get them up and running, you know, in a matter of weeks if they have one of these 20-plus origination partner solutions that already have a connection to Liquid Credit. We can connect them very quickly, test, and get them up and running. So when you're ready to move into the SPSS space and you have one of these proven solutions, the ramp-up time is very quick. So we're always asked who's using the solution. First and foremost, we're very proud of the United States Small Business Administration being a customer. They use us for both portfolio analysis and originations on when they go to back a loan, when they go to in their 7A program. For loans $350,000 and less, they use the SPSS score. You might hear it called the SBPA, you might hear it called something else, but it is the SPSS score. And they utilize it to help reduce the amount of data that is collected, so you don't have to submit as much data, as many documents, if the score is above a certain number. So with that, we're used by a wide swath of customers, everything from Caterpillar Finance to, which is an independent company, to banks like Old National, Fifth Third, HSBC in certain areas, PNC, Huntington, so large banks, top 50 banks, right? Down to some of your credit unions. PSECU is one of them. We also have Boeing Employees Credit Union utilizes the SPSS score. And then we also work in the leasing space. Trigen, HP Finance in their leasing space uses it. And then from an ag perspective, Farm Credit Bank of Texas, Ag First. So this model is utilized in a wide range of financial verticals, as well as sort of sweet spot lending for different organizations. So if you think you're a niche organization who this wouldn't fit, still give us a call. We can probably tell you a story, tell you a customer experience that's somewhat like you, that's using the model and using it effectively to mitigate risk. So the next topic is the Liquid Credit Service. So the SPSS scores and the models have to be delivered to electronically some way. So let's talk about the technology that delivers it and specifically, how it gets delivered. So first and foremost, you have an origination system. You have some sort of loan origination system where you're entering data, collecting data for that applicant, whether it's a web originated application or in-bank. That's sort of irrelevant to us. We're sort of agnostic to how the data gets in there. But as long as that loan origination system or your homegrown solution has a connection to our liquid credit service, we can pull that score for you. So your loan origination system connects to the liquid credit service, and that's done through multi-stage authentication. We do authentication certificates or usernames and an encryption key. The encryption key is a 512-bit encryption key, so it's not really a password. It's more of a very, very secure connection and authentication. We also use the latest TLS 1.2 security for connecting and transmitting data across the web. So all of your data is encrypted as it's being sent in. It's encrypted while it's local to us, and it's encrypted when it's sent back. So we use the latest and greatest data center technologies. The data center that you dial into is PCI certified, and it's ISO 27001 certified as well. So again, latest and greatest protection of your data and your customers' data. So that's step one. Step one is you enter the application, you click submit, and you send us a request. What we do is then we process that application. We go off and we get consumer and or bureau, business bureau information from the bureaus, and I'll talk about that specifically. But we gather the data. FICO doesn't own data. We don't have a repository in small businesses. So every application we score is scored at that moment, right? We go off, we get the data from D&B or Experian Business or the 3 consumer bureaus, and we process it, and we evaluate it. So if you pull a consumer bureau on a principal and that's a thin file, well, we have logic that says, can we use this particular piece of data? And if the answer is no, we fall back to models that don't include that piece of data, and I'll talk about that in a second as well. So we're verifying and validating that data element and finding the best model for this particular application, because application number 1 may include 4 areas of data. Application number 2 may include 2 areas of data. And again, talk about that a little later. But we run the logic and we process those. We score that application, we generate a score and reason codes, and we push all that back into your loan origination system so that you can process that through your electronic strategy, your if-then statements, your policy decisions, to recommend to your underwriters and accept, decline, or review. And by the way, all of this is real time. It takes between 5 and 10 seconds at the most to process all this and get the data back to you. So that's the liquid credit service workflow in a nutshell. If you have any more questions, please follow up with whoever sent you this link. We're always asked, what does an SPSS report look like? Frankly, we don't create a report. Again, we're not a bureau, so we don't have a set of data that we produce. We go off and get bureau reports for you, and then we aggregate that. But what you get with SPSS is the ability to pull consumer reports, and you can get up to 2 consumer scores on each consumer report, sort of like the FICO score, the standard Beacon score or whatever, as well as a secondary score like a bankruptcy score or any sort of secondary score that the bureau sells. And then you'll get an SPSS score and a principal bankruptcy score per principal. So we can pull data on up to 6 principals plus the business, and we're going to score the first 2. So the 2 in the 1 and the 2 slot we can score, and I'll talk about how that works in a second. But we give you an SPSS score for each principal and a personal bankruptcy score to predict bankruptcy on each principal. And then, of course, up to 5 reason codes for each one of those. When we get those reports, the consumer report and the business bureau report, we create a set of characteristics, a set of data that we used in the scoring of the application. So what we do is we pull a consumer bureau report and we crunch the numbers, and we create 40-plus calculated values for you that we present back that your system can consume. So you don't just get an SPSS score. You get basically a characteristic library, a small characteristic library of data that you can utilize in your strategy to evaluate. We also include the 18 consumer report indicators that come on the report. We will generate 30 plus D&B report characteristics, 50 Experian business report characteristics, and parse that in the XML, meaning pull those out of the report and make them available as individual data elements so that your system can consume that. And in general, we produce a printable consumer report. So you got a print image, a traditional bureau report that your loan origination system will create and show you, so that you can look at all underwriters like to see a consumer report. So we present that back to you. We do present back parsed and both consumer and business report data. And it's your loan origination system that creates the look and the feel of the data that we pass back. On the screen now is what the SPSS score looks like in FICO's Origination Manager Essentials solution. What we have is the score. We have the scorecard ID, which is which specific model was used. We've got some COI information related to it, and we've got the model score reasons. So your system should present back something like this, at least the score, the model ID, and the reason codes that came back with a solution. So that's what you get with the SPSS score. So the next topic is how are models created. On the FICO website, we have some ebooks that you can read, and you can go out to myfico.com if you want to know how the FICO score is created. But I'm going to high level how we create the SPSS models themselves. Certainly not a modeler myself. I'm not that smart, but I can show you the high level way that we do it. The first thing you need to know is scoring algorithms, i.e. models or scorecards, are based on historical information. So we have to collect data. And the way SPSS collects data is we have to go back to our existing customer base for SPSS, FICO's larger customer base, and sometimes organizations that we have good relationships with. Again, FICO doesn't own data, so we have to go beg, borrow, and steal data from the public and our customers to obtain that. Sometimes we also rent data when we build models. I haven't done that with SPSS, but it's out there as a possibility. So what we do is we build out, we collect data for a test population, and we build data for a development set. So we divide that pool of data as we collect from our customers. And to build SPSS 7, again, it was hundreds of thousands of applications. It was somewhere under 400,000 accounts that we built the models on, and it was from 7 different lenders, national lenders, diverse geography, but most of them national lenders. So you're getting a good mix of microeconomics around the U.S. To produce this model. And so we divide that into 2 to where we have the test population and the development set, one that we build the model on and one that we test the model on. And so essentially we collect the data and we calculate a set of characteristics. And these characteristics are the data elements that you'll see on the credit bureau reports, both consumer and business, some financial scores, that sort of thing. And then the next thing that we determine is what are we going to call a good account and a bad account? Because remember, the goal of a model is to identify which applications are going to go bad, meaning, in our definition, three times delinquent, 90 days, charge-off or bankruptcy. That's how we define a bad in the SPSS 7 world. A good is 0 missing or late accounts. So a good is something that doesn't go bad, right? Simplistically stated. So we take a look at a small business credit risk, kind of like we look at the consumer credit risk. We use the same methodologies to build the FICO score, the same tools, the same software to build the SPSS score that we use to build the FICO score. And we consider more than just borrower-supplied financials and loan application information. We get bureau data for those accounts at the time of origination. So we compare hundreds of criteria points on small business loans that have been tracked by lenders. Again, we look at large sets of portfolios from diverse geographies in the U.S., and we create an appropriate predictive risk score. So we take data, we look at an observation period, we analyze a performance period, and then that's called our development period. So essentially, that bad account, we're looking to say, when we originate an application or an account using the SPSS score, the score is going to predict if this account is going to go bad over the next 12 to 24 months, and that's the performance period, right? So we're looking ahead to say, this particular application, what are the odds of it going bad, 3 cycles, delinquent, charge-off, or bankruptcy in the next 12 to 24 months? And we give you a number that represents that odds, and we'll talk about that in a second. So the data sources that we analyze, it's the software that we use is really sophisticated. So we collect a number of data elements on each of these accounts. So we're looking at consumer bureau data, and you know, we aggregate that, we centralize that so that we're using the FICO characteristic set, because each of the 3 bureaus, those calculated characteristics may differ a little bit. The 3 bureaus, the FICO score at the 3 bureaus, it's kind of like vanilla ice cream. There's French vanilla, there's vanilla with little bean flakes in it, there's plain vanilla. Each of those is slightly different, so we understand that, and so we create our own set of characteristics to normalize the 3 consumer bureaus. So you don't have to worry about what bureau you're pulling, because we take the raw data, create our own characteristic set to avoid any discrepancy or a bureau bias for that. And then we take the business bureau data sources. And each one of these is unique. Each one of these is different. So we have to have a set of D&B models, a set of Experian business models, a set of Equifax and SBFE models that we use, because those data elements are very unique, right? The D&B PAYDEX score is very uniquely different from the Experian IntelliScore. So we have to utilize those. So you'll see Consumer Bureau plus D&B models, or Consumer Bureau plus Experian business models, because they're uniquely different. We also can utilize Data Consortium, which is a small business risk insight from D&B, or a small business financial exchange, which we get delivered to Equifax. And we also include in our SBFE model a little bit of some Equifax commercial data. I understand SBFE is also available through a number of other sources, but we obtain it through Equifax. So when we determine these characteristics, these characteristics are things like off the Consumer Bureau, the FICO score, off the D&B report, it's the PAYDEX. If you send in financial data, it's things like current ratio, debt service ratio, EBITDA interest, that sort of thing. And then if you include application data, it's the balance of the DDA account at the time as current owner, owner's net worth, combined net worth, if you have multiple principals, that sort of thing. And so we create those characteristics, and then the model builder solution will run these through the system, and it will assign weights to the characteristics, right? So, or if you think about it, points. So each characteristic gets an assignment of points, such as, you know, and I've just got some random characteristics up here, you know, average months in file, net fraction revolving burden, credit bureau score, and we've each of the models that we build has a different point value assigned to it. Because if you think about it, if I have 4 data elements, a consumer bureau, a business bureau, application data, and financial data, all of these have to tally up to 300 points, because our SPSS score is 0 to 300. So those point values have to be a little less if all 4 data elements are presented, whereas if I only had 1 or 2, those point values would be more. And that's when our modelers and our model solutions that we use to build the models help peel that onion and peel those layers and and balance out the points so that at the end of the day, if I just have Consumer Bureau data to score, I can be confident that if that score is a 200 and on the next application I have 3 data elements and that score is a 200, that the risk is represented the same. In other words, a 200, no matter what model is used, represents the same amount of risk as another 200 until all that's normalized. Just like on a FICO score, you know, if a 25-year-old that has 2 credit cards has a 720, that represents the same equal amount of risk that somebody, you know, much older with a more mature credit package with a mortgage, 2 car loans, 3 credit cards, a home equity loan. If theirs is a 720, it represents the same amount of risk, and you don't have to take into any other factors. So that's what we do here, right? That's what the model builders do and the model solutions do. So that's how we assign the points. That's how we build the score. We also create multiple scorecards because sometimes there are data elements that just uniquely change the nature of an application, change the nature of the risk. And in this case, we have multiple subpopulations. You'll see scorecard 111 is subpopulation 1, scorecard 115 is subpopulation 5. That's because it's looking at a different data, looking at a data element differently. It's you know, like the subpopulation 1 might be less than 6 months in file. Subpopulation 5 might be greater than 144 months in file because there are distinct differences in that segmentation, and the models do that, and so we do all that work for you. You can also see here how the different data layers come into play. Like this is an application plus Consumer Bureau plus D&B. For model number 116, model number 121 is application Consumer Bureau plus Experian Business. So those two, from this standpoint, the application plus Consumer Bureau are the same, but we're looking at a different business bureau. So it's all scored separately, right? And we've built that different model. And of course, the output of this is reason codes, and we'll talk about the reason codes. You'll see a list of reason codes in the documentation, but basically, what are the top 4 things I could do to improve my score? Why did the score the way it did? If you ever have a question as to why, and this happens a lot, why did this application that looked good, and you know, the FICO score was a healthy FICO score, nothing really stood out, why did it score so low? First thing you do is analyze the reason codes, and that's going to point you to certain things. It's going to tell you where the reason codes show the score components furthest below their maximum point value, and that's important. So that if the inquiries in the last 0 to 5 months, the maximum points as possible, the calculated score is 35, you get a 0 difference. But if the most number of points I could get for my net fraction revolving burden is 27 and I scored a 12, well, the difference is 15. And amongst the reasons, you know, amongst the characteristics, this is sort of the first reason where I should look, right? So it should tell that underwriter, oh, by the way, look at the net fraction revolving burden, and that's going to tell you why it scored the way it did. So we end up with a ranked reason code list. So it's not just reason codes, it's not just adverse action codes to put on a letter. If an account or if an application ended up in a review status, not an automatic accept or decline, your underwriter should look to this first, right? Look to these reasons because that's why it scored the way it did. And this will help speed that process along. So when we analyze an application, let's say I hand an application to 2 underwriters, they're probably going to give me the same answer, right? They're probably underwriters are smart folks. They've been doing this a while. They know lending, and that's a good thing. And they can tell you, yep, this is a good application, or nope, this is a bad application, or hey, let me go think about it. And if they have to think about it, they could come back, both of them giving you an accept, but for completely different reasons. And that's where the human bias comes into effect. And again, it's not a bad thing. It's just what we do, right? I like debt service ratio, or I like, DSR, right? I like debt service ratio, or I like EBIT to interest, or I like my utilization rate to be low for current loans. I like looking at prior history of the bank. That tells me a lot. I can lock down how they're going to treat me versus how they treat everybody else. So everybody has their bias, and it's good. It's good that we have bias. But what you don't know is you can't quantify risk with that. If I say, well, what are the odds of this application, of this applicant going delinquent, 90 days, charge off, or bankruptcy? The underwriter's not going to tell you. They can tell you good or bad. They can tell you, probably not. But they're not going to be able to give you quantitative numbers like, well, the score was this, and in this pool it represents an odds of default of 20 to 1. So for every 21 applications, one of these is going to go bad. So we're looking at probably a 4-point-something% bad rate or default rate. That's what the underwriter can't tell you. And this is where the regulators want you to go, because there's loss reserves that you have to factor in. There's portfolio risk that you have to factor in. Can I accept a C-grade loan in my portfolio? Well, if you know the overall risk level in your portfolio, you might be able to accept some higher risk loans and still not overburden your portfolio with risk. And so that's what these scores give you. These scores give you, each of these characteristics is weighted, and each of these come up to a final score, which again, it's going to be the same except, but it gives you a little more information to quantify that risk, to be able to put a number to that, so that once you have all of these applications or these accounts scored in your portfolio, you can look at an overall risk of the portfolio based off of the SBSS score. And if you're looking to sell things on a secondary market, if that's your deal, you can say, well, there's a quantified risk of X% delinquency in the portfolio, and you can utilize that going forward in the secondary market if that's your thing. So with all that said, that's how the models are built. That's why we build the models, because you have that objective, quantifiable risk score that's associated to a set of odds. By the way, we don't deliver the odds charts pre-contract. That is something that you have to hold off to, but we do have a set of odds for all of the models and all the permutations of each scorecard. So the components of the SBSS score. This is where sort of the rubber meets the road. And if you need to pause this recording, please do. But the total number of models available for SBSS 7 are 79. So when we talk about the SBSS score, we're really talking about a suite of models that produces a score. Now the score means the same, right? A rose is a rose is a rose. A 200 is a 200 is a 200, right? So that no matter what model produces that score is tied to a risk percentage that's generally the same, right? So we've got 50 term loan and line of credit models with some subset of startup models for businesses 2 years or younger, some leasing models, and some commercial credit card models. Each of those is built along a line of business, first of all, and subsegmented by the data sources. So that's where you get the 79 term loans. You get those subpopulations that I talked about. You get the data combinations. You've got one application data plus consumer bureau data, one consumer bureau data plus business bureau data. And you break those permutations down, you end up with 79 total models. Each of them looking at a score range of 0 to 300. Most businesses scoring between 130 and 240, 130 being a very low score, 240 being a very good score. Low cutoff scores usually range between 175 and 190, depending on how conservative the organization is. And most high cutoff scores, sort of an auto accept, is 230. There's no distinct correlation between FICO score like the consumer FICO and an SPSS score, because we're looking at a broader set of data for a completely different reason. The FICO score looks at, as a consumer, how do they treat their credit? We're looking at them as a small business owner, and even if you're just using Consumer Bureau data, the purpose of an SPSS score is different. The FICO score looks at a general, how are they going to treat every bit of loan product that they have? How are they going to treat the next one? We say specifically how they treat this one based off how they treated the previous one. So a term loan model for SPSS is weighting more heavily term loans and installment loans and lines of credit in the business history and the consumer credit history. A commercial credit card is going to look to see how that principal in the business treated revolving credit a little more heavily than other types of credit. And same with leasing. So if I were to run a leasing, a credit card, and a term loan model on the same business, I may get 3 different numbers. They're probably going to generally be in the same range, but if I've distinctly treated credit cards differently than installment loans, you're going to see a distinct difference in those scores. So all that said, you get subtle variations based off the data elements that are presented and the type of business that you're pursuing. The SBA low cutoff is 140 for loans. I like to say that because they've published it. This is not a thing. They published the 140. But remember that SBA has a completely different purpose in why they back loans. Their job is not necessarily to mitigate risk. That's the bank's job, the financial institution's job, to look at risk mitigation. They're basically making sure that, as I heard one person from the SBA say, it's a fog the mirror test, right? Was the underwriter conscious when they sent this application in? Sort of a joke, but a 140 is a very poor score. But again, for the purposes of what the SBA is in existence for in their charter, a 140 satisfies, right? So that's good enough. But a bank would never lend against a 140, or should rarely lend against a 140. So I'm always asked, so how much data should I use in an application? And really, it comes down to how much do you want to use? What is the purpose of this loan? How do you want to expedite this process? How do you want to evaluate that? So I'm going to talk about that in a second. I do want to talk about the BADs, right? We're looking at a BAD definition. In other words, what the model is measuring is bankruptcy, charge-offs, or 3-cycle delinquent, i.e. 90 days delinquent, over a 12 to 24-month period. So we're looking ahead of time to say, okay, based off what we know, based off looking at this applicant from a small business perspective, using the data elements that I have, how do we predict 90-day charge-off bankruptcy over a 12 to 24-month period? And we're looking specifically in a term loan and line of credit, we're looking for loans lines under $1 million and for leasing under $250,000. We do have customers using them for slightly above those limits. We just say we don't validate above those limits, but it's going to perform equally well, I think, slightly above it, but we're certainly not here to evaluate a $3 million construction loan or a $2 million lease. We do have our caps, and so please pay attention to those. But from the perspective of how does the score what it does, each data element is going to affect the score a little differently. Each data element is going to create a little bit of a different look in the space, and we'll talk about how that's effective in a little bit. I do want to talk about the 2 principal concept. We can score up to 2 principals on an application, and again, you're going to see a little differentiation here. We're not just, we're not blending, we're not averaging, we're not taking a median, anything like that. We are specifically looking at the principal data for each principal, and that's application data and Consumer Bureau data for each individual. And then we blend in the business data, so application data specific to the business, financials specific to the business, and then your business credit report, be that D&B Experian or SBFE, Equifax, or SBRI. And then we give each individual their own SPSS score. Then what we found is that we take the lowest of the two, right? So we take the lowest of the two and pull that across. So it's going to be the 190 here. My apologies about the mistake. It's going to be the 190 is going to be the lowest. So the final SPSS score for this application is the 190. The 210 will be in there, and you can evaluate that. But it is that one is the lowest principal with the blended business data that will be the score. There's also the concept of, because there are 79 different models in the system has what we call model selection logic. And what we do is we take each data element that's presented. So when we go off and we get the Consumer Bureau, we get the Business Bureau, we analyze it. We analyze the thin file. We analyze to see if it has enough data to use. And then we basically run down an if-then statement. Is the consumer file thick enough to use, yes or no? If yes, we go down the with consumer route. If we're presented with a D&D file, is the D&D file thick enough to use? Does it have enough information? If yes, we're down the Consumer Bureau plus D&D route. Then, do we have application data? And we go on ad infinitum to end up with, okay, these are the 3 or 4 or 5 data elements that we have to use. Let's find the best scorecard. So if we're using D&B plus consumer plus application, we then segment off of the subpopulation to determine which of these we're going to use. And that's all built within this logic. You don't control that. You tell us that it's a term loan and line of credit. You tell us to go get a consumer bureau or not, or get a business bureau or not. And then if you want us to get a business bureau, you tell us which one, and we go off, we knock on the door at those bureaus on your behalf using your subscriber codes, so that when we do pull a score for you and present you with an SPSS score and we utilize that data, essentially you're charged for 3 things. You're charged FICO by FICO for the SPSS score, by your consumer bureau partner, and by your business bureau partner. So one of these scores will generate 3 charges, and by the way, you get all that data back, so we're presenting it back for you. What you pay is what you get, right? So, but we utilize all that data in a logic, and we present back this ID score, so that if you have a large enough set of account population, you'll be able to sort of see which scores you're using. And really, in the larger scheme of things, an organization is going to fall back within the 79 scorecard universe to about 4 to 6 models, because you use one business bureau. You have products that require financials or don't require financials. So you really fall back into a small space in the universe that you utilize. So you'll get comfortable with those. But you do want to see, what scorecards am I using, what type of data, what am I using, blended or not blended data in my adjudication. And you can start over time seeing a difference in those scores. And some of our customers will have different score cutoffs for different model IDs. So when I have a D&B report and financials and a consumer bureau report, I'm going to set my cutoff differently than if I don't, or than if I just have consumer bureau data. But again, that's over time, over experience. So why are customers calling us? Customers are calling us for basically 4 reasons. One is reducing risk at the point of origination, right? Straight up risk mitigation. I need some analytics to help me figure out what are the good loans, what are the bad loans, which ones to avoid, which ones to onboard. That's straight up the #1 reason. The second reason is creating a speed to underwrite, right? There's an allowance to say, I need to onboard things more quickly. So how can I speed this process up? How can I onboard things more quickly but not lose any risk mitigation factors? And when you have a score, when it immediately separates the goods and the bads, right? I can take a very, very bad score and immediately decline it so that nobody has to look at it or somebody looks at it just to make sure that everything went well during the process. So, 15 minutes the most, and I know to discard this. Or you've got an application that anybody in the branch would accept because it's so good. Again, it looks over the high score, the high cutoff, and an underwriter checks it for things that, that the score might have missed, and then approves it or declines it, one of it overrides the decision. So it's that sort of thing. So you're really wanting to sweep away what I call the gimme putts and leave for the underwriter the tough decisions. So you're taking the stack of folders, metaphorically or literally, off their desk. You're reducing that stack. So during the day, they have fewer applications to look through. And really, our customers are starting with small dollar tickets. So anything from $100,000 to $250,000. They're saying, let's expedite these, right? Let's score these and let's speed this process along so that when the underwriter gets that $2 million construction loan, they can take more time with it. I call it science versus art. A $100,000 line of credit, I need to get that done quickly. I'm not making that much money off this line of credit. It's important, but it should be adjudicated quickly because I need to spend more time on this $2 million construction loan, which is usually 3 financial vehicles, a month or two long process to figure out what it's going to contain, right? We're going to have a balloon payment, a term loan, a line of credit involved, all that stuff. I need to think about that. I need to mold that. That's art. I craft that. Your underwriters are brilliant at that. So let them spend time on that. Anybody can adjudicate this $100,000 line of credit. So let's score it. Let's use analytics. Let's have the underwriter visualize it, approve it, make sure nothing got missed, and then get it off their desk quickly. So that's the second reason why customers are calling us. And then the third usually has to do with regulatory purposes, right? I need to improve the consistency of my lending decisions, remove as much bias as I can from the process. I need to stay in front of the audit and regulatory requirements. The good thing about this product being used by the SBA is that we run regular performance testing. We're using the SBA population to make sure that the score is still performing, right? So you know that the score is performing well. You know that the SBA regulators ask the same question that your regulators ask, so that eyeballs are on this score. So you never have to question how the score was built, what the components of the score. Do they violate regulatory purposes? No, they don't, because we've had these questions asked previously. The only thing you have to worry about is how are you applying these applications. So you don't have to worry about a model that you built that you then have to defend how you built it, what data you used to construct it, all that stuff. We take care of that for you. And so you're staying ahead of those regulatory concerns. And lastly, because you're reducing the workload of the underwriter, and the smaller institution you go, the more likely the business development person is that underwriter. You help alleviate time and space for that business developer to work. They can go out and get more loans. They can utilize as much technology as they have to speed the process to tell that applicant yes or no, and then move on to the next applicant. They can go into the field and generate more business. They can, internally you can create more products that allow you to grow business. I'm not saying it's going to be a 3x fold, but we've seen customers go from 20 applications a month to 35 applications a month that they're looking at, because they're sweeping away the very, very good and the very, very bad, and they have more time to generate more business. So it is on that smaller scale a game changer for them. And again, this is a visualization of, I've got an automatic accept, an automatic decline. My high risk applications get declined. My medium risk gets sent to the underwriter for more concentration on those applications. So predictive power. With all that said, why is everybody using the score. Again, the first and foremost is risk mitigation, and I want to talk about that. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the tools I'm using to measure. I'm going to let you know what these tools are. Like on screen right now, there's this called a trade-off curve. You might hear it called a ROC, or an ROC, where it's area under the curve. But the concept here is that when you're measuring predictive power of a model, you're trying to do your best to separate the bads from the goods as quickly as possible, so that as I start analyzing the total percentage of my pool, or what I'm measuring, in this case, loan applications, pardon me, I am sweeping away the bad applications. In other words, the bad applications are scoring lower than the good applications. So let's take this point here at 0.8%. So I'm identifying 80% of the bad applications when I've looked at 40% of the total number of loans that are going to go through my door. So in other words, I'm eliminating a lot of my risk when I look at a small percentage of my applications. So that when I get to closer to my 70, 80, and 100%, I'm eliminating the vast majority of risk. So if I set my score to say, or my cutoffs to say, look, I want to accept 60% of the applications, or 40% of the applications that come through my door, or 60% of the applications. This is the amount of risk that I'm working with. So if you need more questions on this, let us know, or you can go off and do some research. This is something you can literally Google and it'll tell you more about it. But what this is showing you is that compared to the SPSS 7 score, compared to just using the FICO or just using SPSS 6, and just using the Business Bureau data, this blended SPSS 7 data, this blended score, or the score itself, outperforms these other two because I'm separating the goods and bads more clearly, with this dotted line here in the middle being basically a coin toss. So I'm getting more effective separation of good and bad using the SPSS 7 score. This is just over the known good-bad population. This tells you, again, it's when we know what's good and what's bad, we get better separation than when we don't know, and that's what should happen. The area under the curve, this is a percentage, so think of this as 80.5%, 80.8. So as you're adding data elements to the application, so this is a Consumer Bureau only plus consumer plus application, consumer plus Experian business, and this is Experian business only. As you layer in 1, 2, and 3 pieces of data, you get more predictive power. Now the question is this significantly more to go get all this data than you need? We'll talk about that in a minute, but this area under the curve is essentially if you were to shade in everything below the solid line here, what percentage of that to the 100% is it? And that's where the ROC area comes into play. This is a fantastic graphic, and I want to focus in on the divergence. I'll let you Google KS and divergence as to what those metrics are, but just know this, the KS above 40 is fantastic, and divergence above 1.5 is fantastic. So the model on the SPSS 7, when I utilize one piece of data, I get really good results. When I factor in another, like business data, and this is SPFE specific with Experian Business, I get a lift in that prediction, right? I get a lift in this risk prediction. I go from 0.47 to 0.49, from 1.53 to 1.7. I'm getting a lift, and that's your general takeaway here. Don't get bogged down in the numbers. Get bogged down into the more data I factor in, the more predictive I get, right? When I'm using 4 pieces of data, consumer plus application plus financial, I'm at 2.13 with the business data factored in. I'm at 1.98 without it. I'm at 1.94 without the financial, without the application data. and I'm at 1.53 with just the Consumer Bureau data. So really the question is, how much data do I need to be predictive? And our consultants will ask you, at what point is more data going to change your mind? And this is what you have to factor in with all these data elements. And this is why a lot of customers of ours are moving towards a small dollar, what they call app-only loan. So where the smaller the dollars, the less data I ask for. So I'm going to let the Consumer Bureau and the Business Bureau take care of my risk. I'm not going to ask for financials for a $100,000 line of credit or a $15,000 line of credit. I'm just going to score that using the Bureau data and let that be my answer. If for some reason I don't get a clear picture and an underwriter says, I'm not sure, they can ask for financials later, but on the upfront and for the vast majority of those applications, those just aren't asked. You don't get financials for those. And that helps you become more competitive in the market because you're getting an answer back more quickly, sometimes in real time within 30 minutes to an hour. This lets you know from a term loan line of credit what percentage of the system, of the development pool had how much, right? These are credit amounts. So the vast majority of the credit amounts were between $20,000 and $200,000. We had enough above $500,000 up to $1 million to validate up to $1 million. Because remember, this 4.8% is over 300,000 plus loans. So that number, the actual number, is very, very high. 10% between the 200 and 500,000 represents 30,000 loans and lines of credit, roughly. This shows you, and you can pause this, pardon me, you can pause this if you want to look at it, from an amount requested from 50,000 to 100, 100 to 2, 200 plus, we've given you divergence and KS. So these numbers back here were in general. These numbers here are specific to that band. And you notice we gain strength as we go up for the dollars. Now we get a little weaker here. It's still a fantastic number, but it's not as strong as the 50 to 100,000. But that's probably because the data population was less, right? Plus, the closer you get to $1 million, the less you're running SPSS scores, the less you're actually relying on SPSS scores. So you can get a lot more overrides at that point because you're looking at, you're doing a full financial spread at $1 million rather than just using a score, and fully respect that. But again, the KS above 40 is also fantastic. The SPSS 6, by the way, not bad numbers here. Not bad numbers, but still a 7 is much stronger, and we like our 7. Again, rock area for 200,000 plus, solid separation between goods and bads. We have a startup model which uses some Consumer Bureau plus application data. Again, the divergence, the KS, the ROC, the Gini, fantastic numbers. You get an improvement over just looking at the FICO score itself, because typically with smaller businesses, small businesses that are new, there's not a lot of financial data that means a lot. There's not a lot, you're not going to get a thick D&D file with less than 2 years of data, even if they even have one. So it's very consumer focused, and again, you get separation above the FICO score. Some good clear separation that would warrant utilizing the startup model. And then I talked briefly about the bankruptcy score. The bankruptcy score comes along with every principal, and this is a principal-based score, so it's not a small business bankruptcy, it's a principal-based bankruptcy score to let you know the likelihood of a bankruptcy with that principal. So I say all that to let you know that businesses are utilizing the SPSS score to grow their business and to reduce delinquencies. Harborstone Credit Union, fantastic customer. We really like them. We'd like to thank them for the success story to go public. They needed to streamline a small business loan processing flow and speed up the time to complete from weeks to hours, right? They're looking to be very competitive in the market. And so they went with the SPSS score. And in doing so, they more than doubled their loan volume because they're looking at things differently, right? They're analyzing things using math and science as opposed to just using humans. So we're taking some of that burden off the human adjudicators and only giving the human adjudicators the burden when it's deserved, right? We're not going to insult the underwriters with a very easy decision. We're going to ask them to review and then move on to the tougher decisions. So I don't know if that makes the underwriters happy or not, but it gives them more difficult stuff to work with, right? Let's give you a more difficult puzzle to solve as opposed to an easy puzzle. And it's reduced the delinquencies. So under $50,000, it's all but eliminated their delinquencies. So because you can set your cutoffs. You can say, look, if I'm doing this real quick, I'm going to set this score high. And within the first 2 years of deployment, their delinquencies for these dollar values were eliminated. Ascentium Capital is also a fantastic customer. Again, thanks to them for this story. They wanted to expand and grow their equipment lease portfolio, and so they did. But again, you want to expand business, but you want to keep risk in check. So how do I do that? Again, I could tell the story a dozen times over. It's with the SBSS score. So they got to grow their portfolio to $1.2 billion in assets utilizing the score. They identify more customers inside its risk profile. In other words, they were turning away customers without the score that they now find out they can keep. So they've expanded their business by doing nothing, right? They're just collecting the through-the-door applications, and they've accepted more business, which is awesome. No additional work, more business, more money, more profit. And they achieved the goal to deliver lending decisions in under 2 hours by utilizing the SBSS score. So it's fantastic success story. And Chris Miller, who, again, thanks, Chris, for the quote, if we only picked easy decisions with the strongest credit scores, we'd miss out on a lot of business. SBSS gives us a more accurate picture of the overall health of the business and helps us make those tougher decisions. Again, the whole purpose of the score wrapped up in this nice, neat little quote from Chris Miller at Ascentium. And then Jeff Ivey at Harborstone. FICO Small Business Scoring Service has worked flawlessly for us. We figured if it works for the SBA, it should work for us too. And that's a good starting point, right? The SBA has vetted this. This score has literally been vetted by Congress, and that's a literal statement. You know, it had to go through the rigmarole to be accepted, to be the de facto small business score by the SBA, and so it went through that process. So if it went through that process and got accepted by the SBA, surely it can work for you. I like that story. I like that tale. Another quote from another customer is, the SBSS score got me through 2 recessions. And I love that quote. Can't quote the person, but it's a fantastic quote to say, you know, during the tough times, it's still gonna mitigate that risk. So in summary, the SBSS score is a well-accepted score throughout the market. We generate over 1 million scores a year, used by every type of financial institution you can think of throughout the United States. It helps mitigate risk, it helps meet regulatory requirements, and it's going to help you speed that process along when you want it sped up, right? You can expedite decisioning utilizing the SBSS score. So whatever goal you have, be it risk mitigation, increasing profits, speeding the process, speeding the process to decision, we can assist you with that. Look at the links on screen. Visit fico.com. If you just want to search for small business credit, you can find that. If you want to contact us using the phone numbers inside and outside the United States, feel free. You can come get our latest and greatest ebook topics, and please utilize our resources as much as possible and contact us for more information if you have any. I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much, and I look forward to speaking with you.